Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we are jumping into another review of beers I have sourced from Tavour. I know I keep doing a lot of these, and I'm telling you, if you haven't checked them out, do yourself the favor and just log on, check out their website, tavour.com, or you can download their app on either the Apple App Store or via the Android store as well. Well worth it. You can get your hands on some seriously great beer that's very hard to get your hands on otherwise. Kind of think of it as your inside man to some quality craft beer and give you some different stuff to drink that you can't find in your local market. Nonetheless, for today's review, we're going to be doing a couple of flavored IPAs, and they are two beers I've never had before. I've had one beer, I think, from one of the brewers, and one is completely new to me. Both a little bit different, but I'm very much looking forward to it. So to start today, we're going to be jumping into Decadent Ales. This is Orange Cream Pop, which is an IPA brewed with vanilla extract and orange puree. This one clocks in at 6% ABV, and they are based out of Stratford, Connecticut. For the second beer, we're going to be trying, this is one I've never had anything by them, Brickstone Brewery, and it's called Milkshake IPA. This one's brewed with raspberries, blackberries, vanilla, and lactose, and clocks in at 8.5% ABV. Technically, they could classify this as an imperial or double milkshake IPA, but they just call it Milkshake IPA. Nonetheless, it's got a pretty substantive ABV on this one at 8.5. They are based out of Bourbonnais, Illinois. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm not sure. But nonetheless, two flavored IPAs that both just sound absolutely awesome. I can't wait to jump into them. After all of the IPAs that I've reviewed and had over the years, I have still yet to actually have a milkshake IPA. This will be my very first. I've heard really great things about this sub-style, and I'm very looking forward to jumping into this one. But nonetheless, we're going to get things kicking off with the Decadent Ales Orange Cream Pop. This is the vanilla extract and orange puree brewed IPA, clocking in at 6% ABV. Okay, so jumping right in with the first beer of today's flavored IPA review, we have got Decadent Ales Orange Cream Pop. This is the IPA brewed with vanilla extract and orange puree, clocking in at 6% ABV, and they are based out of Stratford, Connecticut. Now, I have had one beer from Decadent Ales, many months ago. I honestly don't recall what it was, but I do recall liking it very much, so I'm hoping that this will keep that trend going. Starting off with label art, it's very much got its namesake. It's got an orange cream pop, looks like an ice cream man carrying it, and a dog looking longingly. It's got a little bite out of it. Kind of a, I don't know, looks kind of 1950s-ish kind of art theme going with it. So it looks the part. Nonetheless, let's get this one cracked and poured right in the glass. Gently does it. That's right. And this is a nice big pint beer, so this will not all fit in my Sam glass. All right. Pouring it in. Oh, this is a lovely IPA. It's very light. I would say this looks remarkably similar to, say, the color of a Saison or a Goza. It's that very pale straw yellow. I didn't anticipating it being that light, but it looks great. Oh, I can tell you this has a very pronounced aroma. I can smell it from here. Let's hold it up. Visually, it looks very nice. It's got a slight cloudiness to it, but it's not ridiculously hazy. You can see light through it, but it does have a slight cloudiness. I do see very active carbonation. Looks like a mix of very fine champagne-like bubbles as well as some medium. I don't see anything too large coming up, but it does appear to be very active. In terms of head, it poured okay. I probably could have been a little more aggressive down the middle, especially given how active it is in carbonation. So one of two things I expect may happen. One, it's just going to collapse the head it did form. Or two, it's just going to keep reforming this head slowly over time and at least keep a nice little pad floating. But looks great. And I can tell you I can smell it from a good distance away, but let's get right up on it and see what we get. Oh yeah, that smells nice. Oh, it smells so nice. It smells very fresh. This smells like a very fresh IPA, like the hops in it are very fresh. It doesn't smell super pungent in terms of hop potency. I'm not expecting a massive boot full of alphas. Mostly what I'm getting is a slight floral with just a hint of earth and the tiniest twinge of a pine aroma. So that's kind of three of the five main subcategories that I use as descriptors for aroma and flavor in terms of hops. But it smells very nice. In tandem with that, you can absolutely smell the orange. I would say less so orange puree is the aroma I'm getting than fresh citrus fruit itself, or even the rind full of the oils. But it definitely, you can smell that orange. Now, I cannot detect the vanilla on there, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be in the taste. But we're about to find out, so let's jump right in. It smells great, it looks great. Let's do it. Oh, that's very nice. Wow, that orange really comes through strongly, very strongly. And yes, the vanilla is in there. It's subtle, it's in the back, but I think it's balanced beautifully so it doesn't overpower the orange or the base beer itself. This actually truly does properly put me in mind of an orange cream pop in beer form, and it's in IPA form, so what's not to love? This really is quite nice. This is very enjoyable. I'll tell you, the first sensation other than, wow, I can't believe that really tastes like that, was the first thought that came through my head was this would be a perfect hot weather beer, a perfect summer day beer. It's just so crisp and refreshing, and it's just so nice. This is very, very, very well done. That's my initial reaction. So I'm going to jump in for body and mouthfeel and start to think about how these flavors develop. In terms of body, it's a solid medium. So it's got a really nice body for the ABV range. It's bigger than I'd anticipate. It's quite present. The mouthfeel feels mostly flat in terms of watery, or just kind of like a standard IPA. You can feel a bit of carbonation working there. If you agitate it vigorously around the palate, it does get a little creamy, but not crazy. It's not like cream ale or nitro tap stout or anything like that, but it does add a little more thickness. But I would not call this a super thick or viscous beer. It feels like a standard IPA, just with a nice body for the ABV range. It's got real presence. I got to enjoy those flavors again, and I was thinking so much on the texture and the weight that I wasn't really processing what I was experiencing, even though it was enjoyable. So I'm going to jump in for one more sip here so I can really pick this apart. I love the balance. It's so nice. You first get it in your mouth, swish it around, you swallow, and the first thing you get is bright citrus. Bright citrus. And within 3 to 5 seconds, that vanilla starts to creep in the back, and those two flavors meld, and you just absolutely get orange cream pop. You do. Very much that is the top flavor profiles that come through in this beer. Below that is the hops, which you can get in the aroma with some different characteristics to it, but it's very subtle. I would say overall, the hop flavor that comes through in this is mostly floral with a little bit of earthy, but it's very, very much underneath the orange and the vanilla. They really did set this out to be an orange cream pop IPA, and that's the star. It's all about the orange and the vanilla, but it's very, very crisp. In terms of the malt bill, they obviously used a very light one. I think that's a very smart decision based on the ingredients and the flavor profile they're trying to bring out in this beer, and they executed it very, very well. I mean, this is just very well put together, especially for their concept, and honestly, I think they nailed it. I don't know how much better you could get this in IPA form. Certainly you could go the lactose route and sweeten it up a little bit to play on the actual dessert side, but I think the malt bill in tandem with the hops they chose and the amounts and how they balance this is just so well done. This is just so well done. This is a really, really nice beer, and I'm going to say it again. If this were a hot summer day, I would absolutely be loving this. I love this anyway, but this would just be a tremendous beer to enjoy kicking back on a hot summer's day out on the porch to cool off. It's just fantastic. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get to the second beer of today's flavored IPA review. That is Brickstone Brewery's Milkshake IPA. It's brewed with raspberry, blackberry, vanilla, and lactose, and that one clocks in at 8.5% ABV. Okay, now jumping into the second beer of today's IPA review, we have got Brickstone Brewery's Milkshake IPA. This one's brewed with raspberry, blackberry, vanilla, and lactose. They are based out of Bourbonnais, Illinois. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this one clocks in at 8.5% ABV. So this is getting on up there in the range. I think they technically, if they wanted, could call this a double or imperial, but they just stuck with plain IPA nomenclature and milkshake because it's a milkshake style. So first beer I've ever had by Brickstone, and the first actual milkshake IPA. I'm finally getting to try one. I'm very, very excited. So first things first, in terms of label art, it's very clean. It's got a very clean design. Nothing particularly interesting, so to speak. So let's just get this bad boy cracked gently. Gently. All right. And poured right in the glass. Oh, that's a nice looking IPA. Yeah, with raspberry and blackberry. Kind of expected that would impart some color, and indeed it looks lovely. This is pouring out quite thick. Seems quite thick. Formed a decent head, considering the thickness of it, but let's hold this up. Visually, it's very kind of hard to see through. It looks occluded, rather cloudy. Other than that, the hue is very nice. It's kind of a purplish red. It's very, very nice looking, and the head formed okay. It's still holding there. Let's give it a sniff. Oh, that smells really nice. I'll be honest, this reminds me a lot, just aroma-wise, of framboise lambic. The raspberry is really, really coming through. Blackberry you can get a bit of as well, but raspberry is a very pungent fruit. Certainly, in my opinion and the experience, it's a bit more pungent than blackberry. And it's really making its presence known, and it smells very fruity, smells excellent. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Can't wait. Oh, that is delicious. That is positively delicious, okay? And on first sip, I'm thinking about so many things, but my brain immediately went to, I fully understand why they call these milkshake IPAs. It's got the mouthfeel and thickness and quality of the milkshake when it's in your mouth. It's so thick. And let me tell you, the raspberry and the blackberry come through perfectly, perfectly clearly. It is very, very fruit forward. And the vanilla comes in the back and adds almost kind of this fruit and cream feel to it. The lactose obviously did thicken it some, and it's really helping accentuate the fruit. But it's not lactose to the point where you would add a volume such as in a milk stout you really wanted to sweeten up. It's got enough to let the actual fruit speak and taste and feel like actual fruit do in real life without their flavors getting masked. But I wouldn't say that it's a sweet beer per se. It just is enough to let the fruit come through, and it is absolutely delicious. Absolutely delicious. Okay, I'm going to go back in for another sip. I think I'm body and mouthfeel. I mean, my initial reaction was it's very big. I expect that's correct. I'm going to start thinking on this flavor development. The body's a nice medium, border of medium heavy. Right about where I expected for the ABV, perfect. The mouthfeel is so much bigger and thicker and more viscous than you would anticipate at this ABV level. And I imagine that's part of the allure of the milkshake sub-style IPAs that have been coming out in the last few years. It's really got a massive amount of presence. And yeah, to answer your question, if you do start to agitate it around the palate to let the flavors roll around, it gets so thick and creamy, it's insane. It really does feel very akin to a cream ale or a nitro tap stout. It is that thick and creamy and lush. It's very thick, silky like cream. It's just lush. It's lush and thick and big. In terms of flavor, This beer's all over the place. It's very, very fruit forward, and that vanilla adds this layer of fruit and cream. So that's really kind of the major vibe I'm getting from this beer. Raspberry, blackberry, and cream. And it's absolutely delicious. I'm going to jump in for one more sip here. Before I do, the balance on this is just an absolute home run. They nailed it. I love what they did with this. I'm going to go in for another sip to explain how the flavors develop and finish. Okay, first get it in your mouth and first swallow, it's just big fruit. Big punch of fruit. Blackberry and raspberry, really more or less in equal parts. After a few seconds, the vanilla comes through and it adds that creamy layer underneath it. And it truly, truly does put me in mind of, blackberry and raspberry and cream. It's exactly what it tastes like. It almost tastes like beer candy. It's absolutely delicious. In terms of pungency, the pungency hits you up front and it holds for a few seconds, and then all the flavors start to meld together after that kind of 3 to 5 second mark, and then they kind of hold there for a few seconds and it slowly starts to taper off. In terms of length of finish, it's not super long. In terms of an IPA, this is not a beer you would sip on and say, wow, that's very hop forward. In fact, if it didn't say IPA on the can, you could easily not even suspect that it was brewed as some other substyle of IPA, because there's really no hop presence, so to speak, at all. Not in terms of aroma, not in terms of flavor, and certainly not in terms of bitters. It's not about that. It's all about this fruit and this vanilla and kind of playing on a milkshake in beer form. And if that is the goal, they absolutely nailed it. I mean, this is just so good. This is a very, very unique new beer style and subsegment of the IPA tree, and I see why it's so hugely popular. Do I think that maybe, it's a little bit of a misnomer calling it an IPA? Yes, I do, because IPAs are really a story of the hop, and this is anti-hop. This almost feels to me like it should be its own different animal. I don't know what that would be, far be it from me to make a proposal, but it's so far flung from the realm of IPAs and hops that, it's interesting. Somebody that said, oh, I don't like IPAs, this would be one that I would have them sample, and I'm sure that they would be flabbergasted that this is technically considered an IPA, because it shares no commonality whatsoever, essentially, with really any other IPA subcategory. They're about the hops, this is not. But this is absolutely delicious. It is absolutely delicious. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up my scores, and when we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both of these beers, we're going to get them ranked. Starting with the Decadent Ales Orange Cream Pop, this was an IPA brewed with vanilla extract and orange puree, clocking in at 6% ABV, and they are based out of Stratford, Connecticut. Starting with the aroma on this beer was fantastic. It was really, really quite pronounced as well. In terms of pungency, it was there. You could smell it from a pretty good distance, and once you got closer and closer to the glass, you really got a good idea. It smelled very fresh. And it did have an underlying hop aroma, but dominant was very much orange. And it put me in mind more of orange zest or rind with kind of the pungent orange oils, but really smelled nice. It was just 1 point shy of being the top tier in terms of pungency. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the flavor, I absolutely loved it. And honestly, I think they nailed an orange cream pop. The vanilla extract really played into it, but it wasn't overbearing. It was subtle, and it was enough to marry with the orange, and that it really did create kind of the feel of an orange cream pop. I absolutely loved it. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the body on this beer was very robust and certainly much larger than you'd anticipate for just a 6% ABV on an IPA. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the mouthfeel was not quite as robust and didn't have as much thickness to it. 6%, that's not that high. Overall, the mouthfeel was mostly flat. There was a little effervescence. It was kind of just an average version of an IPA. Again, a low ABV, but it was what it was. It gets a 5 out of 10. For the finish on this beer was quite nice. It was certainly longer than I expected for 6% ABV, but it wasn't really long in terms of an IPA. Really, this beer was much more so about the orange and the vanilla playing up the cream pop side than it was having a heavy hand with the hops and using high alphas to extract lingering bitters. But it was still above average. It gets a 7 out of 10. For the head and retention, it did quite well on this beer. Formed reasonably well, and it stuck around for a reasonable amount of time. It was certainly above average. It gets an 8 out of 10. For the appearance, honestly, I was kind of taken aback by how light this was. It was very much a pale straw yellow color, much more akin to, say, a farmhouse ale, a Goza, a Saison, something of that nature. Very much on the light end of the spectrum. It was in range, just lighter than I anticipated. I docked 1 point. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the balance, frankly, I thought this was just beautifully balanced. For what they were going for, making an orange cream pop IPA, I think that they got the balance of ingredients exactly right. Even though it wasn't a super hop flavor, aroma, and bitter forward IPA, being that they were going for kind of a flavored angle, they really nailed it. And the hops were still there. You got a nice bit of aroma and a decent bit of flavor. It just wasn't super heavy on the bitters, which frankly probably would have thrown off the orange cream pop vibe. I thought it was great. It gets a 10 out of 10. Filling in the intangible, I loved it, honestly. I was excited just by the name of the beer, but when I finally got into it and got to take a few sips, I was convinced. Yeah, they really did a great job of making an orange cream pop in beer form. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10 from me. Finally, is an example of the style. Overall, I really enjoyed this beer. There's a lot of IPAs out there, certainly, and a lot of flavored ones are coming out, and this one was very, very well done. Really, for me, I docked some points in a few categories, notably mouthfeel and in length of the finish. So it did take a little bit of a knock there, but I thought the beer was so strong for what they were going for that I only docked 1 point overall. As an example of the style, it gets a 9, which brings the total score on Decadent Ales Orange Cream Pop to an 87 out of 100. So this is well above average. I really enjoyed it, thought it was a really cool concept and executed very, very well indeed. Moving on to beer number 2. First beer I've ever had by this brewer, and the first of this sub-style IPA sub-style. Brickstone Brewery's Milkshake IPA. This one specifically is raspberry and blackberry. Also had added vanilla and lactose. Clocks in at 8.5% ABV, so that's getting on up there in the standard IPA ABV range. They are based out of Bourbonnais, Illinois. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm not sure. So if I'm wrong, please correct me down in the comments. I do want to get it right. Starting with the aroma. The aroma on this beer was quite pronounced, not dissimilar to the first one. It wasn't quite as pungent, but you could still smell it from a reasonable distance. And once you got over it, you could really, really get a whiff of what it was about. It smelled very fruit intense. In fact, to the absence of almost everything else that goes into creating an IPA. It had a very pronounced aroma, though the raspberry was very much dominant. I couldn't really pick up on the other ingredients they threw in, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. Above average, it gets an 8 out of 10. For the taste, absolutely loved it. First milkshake IPA I've had, kind of threw me for a loop because while it is technically an IPA, it's really taking another turn than angling for hop characters here. This was all about the fruit. And even though I couldn't detect the blackberries on the aroma that came through in full force in the flavor, it was almost an even blend of blackberry to raspberry ratio. And then that vanilla mixed with the lactose. The lactose was just enough to accentuate the flavors to let the fruit speak like they would actual fruit, not having all their sugars fermented out. But it wasn't what I would call sweet. And really what it reminded me of was fruit and cream. It was raspberry and blackberry and cream, and it was absolutely delicious. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the body, this was a very, very robust body. I understand why they call this sub-style milkshake, because it was heavy like a milkshake. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the mouthfeel, same story here. Very, very thick and viscous mouthfeel, and even the slightest bit of agitation around the palate made it even thicker and creamier and richer. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the finish Finish on this beer was not that long, and once I smelled and got the first sip, I kind of had a suspicion that would be the case because it didn't really have a lot of hop backbone on which to play. Hops do a lot of things in an IPA, and one of the things they're great at is extending length of finish because there's so much pungency in terms of flavor in the lingering bitters. But this was not about the bitters. This was about the fruit and the cream. And, you know, it was what it was. It was high end of average, but not as long as your average IPA to be certain. It gets a 6 out of 10. Head and retention. Frankly, this did a good job, though. Calling itself a Milkshake IPA, I did expect it to be a bit more robust and frothy. That said, it did form well, and it did hold around, certainly above average. It gets an 8 out of 10. For the appearance, this was an absolutely lovely beer. You could tell that the natural colors imparted from the raspberry and blackberry just made it this deep ruby red. It was lovely. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance, I absolutely loved the balance on this beer. The balance between both fruit and the vanilla, and key for me was the lactose. It was just enough to let the fruit actually taste like the fruit prior to fermentation, but without adding this overt sweetness to the beer. So really how it came out was liquid fruit and cream, and it was just delicious. Just beautifully balanced. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the feeling and the intangible, first beer I've had from this brewer, first Milkshake IPA, and I totally get it. I understand why these are hugely popular. It really was delicious. I loved it. It gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, I teeter-tottered on this, but I decided this is such a big up-and-coming sub-style that really I need to consider this as its own subcategory. Even though maybe, you know, it's technically an IPA, it is very much its own animal. And as a Milkshake IPA, with the ingredients they threw in, what they're going for, and how this sub-style is created and what it's all about, it is its own thing. And I think that they have a home run on their hands with this one as the Milkshake IPA sub-style. I gave it top points. It gets a 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Brickstone Brewery's Milkshake IPA to a 92 out of 100. So another very, very high score, well above average. Only 5 points between the two. Both absolutely fantastic flavored IPAs. Well worth seeking if you're a fan of these flavored IPAs and sub-styles. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, you can just click the notification bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.